All right, welcome back to a very special bonus episode of the 10 Count. As always, I am that art of the beat of the V, Richard Bronson Vickery. Joined on the other screen, on the other side of the screen there, Poz. You remember when there used to be three of us?
Yeah, remember, yes, the legend of Jargo. Yes.
I was gonna say, hey, we used to ride the three amigos. We used to do this incredible little series. I'm sure it's still available over in the Two-Man Power Trip Vault. You can go look for those. But we each and every week and each and every episode, we asked who is, and we would go through a plethora of topics from the greatest to the worst, the memorable moments, all of that throughout the history of professional wrestling. So on today's special bonus episode, we're gonna take all of those great episodes. Those were from years ago, mix them all into one great episode of the 10 Count, and run through our who is topics here. Poz, are you ready, man? We've got a lot of them and a little time to get through them, man. I say we just go ahead and jump into this one. What better way to get this thing going? Great debate amongst professional wrestling fans, and it is the fans themselves. You know, we're talking globally, regionally, the greatest fan base. And this could be what they represent today, what they've gone through history. Poz, who you giving the nod to, man? Who is rocking those arenas?
Crazy. Nowadays, the European crowds seem to be really, really hot, like France. But I know a lot of people say annoyingly so, and they're trying to get themselves over, and they're starting to create their own chants. I thought the Puerto Rican fans, when WWE would go to Puerto Rico, I thought they were nuts, but not like maybe self-serving, not just insane for wrestling, just insane pops. But I got to go. I mean, and I feel like it was have to. And I don't know if you'll agree. Northeast. The Northeast fans, whether it's Philly, New York, New Jersey, they're always the best. They're always the craziest. Sometimes the most unpredictable, too, which I like sometimes. Sometimes you want your fan base to cheer the baby faces and boo the heels and stuff, but I like how they can be very, very unpredictable at times, too, and be a tough fan base and just be all around nutty. Like, I'm not necessarily a fan of Philadelphia, thanks to the Eagles. I feel like those fans are the worst, but wrestling fans,
they were throwing snowball rocks at Santa Claus in Philadelphia.
Yeah. But I don't know, I love the wrestling fans just because they're usually like nutty, like just nuts and into it, and they get. I think Northeast is the best.
Okay, I'm glad you didn't give the nod to the Euro fans there. I think probably amongst on the opposite side of the scale here. The spectrum is the most annoying. But you know what? As I was thinking about this topic, I knew where you were going to go in your backyard in the Northeast. But to me, that is the birthplace of the smirk. You want to talk about where fans want to get overly involved. They want to be characters in the show. That is the Northeast. I'm going to give the nod for the best wrestling fans of all time, and especially during the territory days, is Southern wrestling fans. They wanted to, they didn't want to know everything. They just wanted to buy in. They wanted to live vicariously through their heroes and hate the villains. And they took it so personal. We've heard how many great stories about, how wrestlers almost fearing for their lives or riots breaking out because they believed and they wanted it so much. So my nod for the greatest fan base goes to the Southern wrestling fans.
All right, that's fair. That's fair. I think North is better, but that's fair.
Now, wowing all those fans around the world, whatever the case might be, hey, we wouldn't be anything without the different styles, presentations from the wrestling promotions. Poz next up on our who is the greatest wrestling promotion, and we are going to make it a little more difficult on us here. Not the WWE.
I got to go. I know you could say NWA, but I don't know. I would think WCW just because I know people, LOL, WCW, and all those, they screwed up this, screwed up that. Without WCW, where would we be today? I mean, they are the ones that kind of really shaped wrestling. I know other promotions and other people want to give certain other promotions, and maybe in Philadelphia, too much credit, way too much credit for their accomplishments in wrestling. But WCW, without them, they created the Attitude Era. The NWO changed the business forever. Without Hogan and the NWO, where the hell is wrestling today? There would be no Steve Austin. There would be none of that stuff would have happened with the Attitude Era. So I feel like it's got to be WCW. And they also had some of the greatest matches of all time. If you want to talk about a bunch of the War Games matches, I know obviously you can count the NWA involved as well. And I might kind of say NWA/WCW and Crockett Promotions, but I got to go WCW.
It was that money boost sorry, cut you off on that, but that money boost that they got from Turner that really elevated them to WCW. And believe me, when I was looking at this question here, I really wanted to go somewhere else besides WCW. As you said, ECW had such great influence. But that overall impact, and of course, internationally, with historically what we've seen with AAA, the great Puerto Rican promotions as well, the great promotions out of Japan in the Far East. But when you look at the grand spectrum, that crossover, that true impact, nothing against TNA here, no one had that like WCW did it. They challenged the beast, the machine in WWE. They made them reinvent themselves. They had crossover appeal. They were at the forefront of society. So it's hard to disagree with WCW, but certainly some great other promotions out there as well. As we talk about the fans, the promotions, their tremendous impact, we pull those all together, Poz, and hey, you and I have each lived through quite a few of these here. Who would you say takes the nod as the top era in professional wrestling?
Man, this is a tough one because when you think about throughout the history of wrestling, you just think about it through time. I always say the Hogan era. And a lot of people call it the golden era of WWF, basically 84 to 93, rock and wrestling era like that. But I call it Hogan era, of course. 84 to 93 WWF. That's got to be the best, but also the Monday Night War era when you had NWO versus WCW, and then you had Austin versus McMahon. So those two are the best. I'd probably give the slight nod to Hogan because that's kind of when I fell in love with wrestling, and he's kind of the reason why the Attitude Era and Monday Night Wars did work as well because of Hogan. So I'll go back to the original Hogan. I'll go Hogan era at WWF. The 90s, and I know people will say today's wrestling. I know some of those fans out there love today's, but you can't compare it to the Hogan era, or even the Monday Night War era, either the Attitude Era.
Poz loves the Hogan era, as he's calling it so much that he has a complete series named after it. You want to check that out over at the Two Bad Power Trip, the Hulk Hogan era. Poz, I wanted to go along with you. The little RBV, that little fan in me, that's what we fell in love with. So many of those great memories where we just looked at these superstars truly in awe of the spectacle that is professional wrestling. But many of the same points that I used to make my case for WCW as that top promotion outside of WWF that we've ever witnessed, it has to be the Attitude Era. And again, it might be because we did get to live it. We did get to experience. But again, it is when WWE, WCW, ECW, and we had a number of other indie promotions that kind of caught some fire around then. But it pushed professional wrestling to the forefront. It crossed over those boundaries. It was a leader in society, in trends, and what people look to. I mean, it wouldn't be crazy to go out in a crowd of 100 people to see a few dozen people wearing professional wrestling T-shirts, or you got the water cooler talk back then. Everybody, at high school, what was the chatter about? Professional wrestling. It was where it was at. That was the crossover. We've never seen anything like that in any other era there.
It's hard to argue. Definitely hard to argue.
You're right. I had something else there, but I lost my thought. But we'll keep going here. Hey, you just did an awesome spot this past weekend. Dropped in over at Keeping It 100. K-Dog, Disco, Beanie. Great conversation over there. You guys were talking about the all-time great storylines in professional wrestling. Brother, there have been a lot of them out there to get fans hooked, to move those needles. But Poz, which is the storyline of storylines that you truly have always, that's got you hooked, that you've loved, that you point to when you're telling people about how great professional wrestling is?
I always point to three, and I'll pick one, of course, eventually. But I always point to three that I think were the best. Macho Man versus Hulk Hogan, the Mega Powers, and the Mega Powers Explode.
You talk about little us fans, man. Our heart was breaking.
Unbelievable storyline. One of the absolute all-time best, man. Maybe like the pinnacle of storytelling, and kind of like what you aspire to be storytelling-wise, and just be able to get there. That's that feud. Austin versus McMahon, without a doubt, is got to be up there. I love Austin McMahon. It's so good, so well done. All the different guys you kind of plug, like you plug in Dude Love, and you plug in Kane, you plug in Undertaker, you plug in Heel Rock. But really, the overarching was Austin McMahon, and that whole feud is so good. And of course, the NWO. Easily to me, I got to put that number one. It was the most innovative. It was the best. It was changed the business forever. It literally sparked the business. Nothing better than that. Hogan turned heel for Christ's sake. I mean, it was just unbelievable. And just to throw it in for current storylines to keep up with Conan, Conan threw in there the Bloodline storyline as one of the greatest of all time. So I was one to consider, but I would go NWO.
To hear the debate, the great conversation with Poz and the guys from Keeping It 100 about that bloodline. Make sure you find those clips over on YouTube. Poz, you might have some out there. I know Keeping It 100 has it out there. You've already got some clips there, brother. So congratulations for that crossover, that promotion. When it comes to these storylines, man, it is hard to beat your arguments, the resumes that you laid out, because some game changers pulling those emotional heartstrings, just even for myself. I'm gonna go a different direction, and I think the true game changer, which was the precursor, which laid the groundwork, gave the blueprint, paved the way for the Attitude Era in WWE, and that is when Bret Hart led the Hart Foundation and the world versus America.
It's a good one.
We'd never seen anything like that with the role reversals. We're here on our soil in the great states of the USA. Our guys were the babies. Bret and his crew were the heels, but you go just a little bit north into Canada, you go anywhere else around the globe, those roles absolutely flipped. So you talk about tremendous separation. And in wrestling is so great when reality, when it mirrors reality. What do we always hear? How the rest of the world hates Americans. And we brought that to the pro wrestling ring. I absolutely, to me, the all-time greatest storyline that we see, Bret Hart and the Hart Foundation and the entire world versus America, man. That was great. And what a great, representation when the WWE brought in the Patriot as part of that.
Yes. I was actually just thinking about that the other day. Bret had that awesome match at Ground Zero with the Patriot. They didn't think it was going to be like a good match, and like it was unbelievable. It's like, oh my god, it might have been like the match of the night over Undertaker and Michaels that night. It was really good.
Was so emotionally charged. And people were just so invested in it. We talk about the Hart Foundation. Of course, they're right up here in our next topic. They were so great in what they did, but there's been some great ones throughout the history. I know we're going to probably throw out a couple of names here, but those groups, when they come together, those power moves, how they change the business, the greatest faction to ever exist in professional wrestling, Poz.
Man, Hart Foundation, that's a good one. I was thinking of a bunch of them, like old school, though. I was thinking like Heenan family and different factions like that. For some reason, people bring up DX. DX is such an NWO ripoff. You can't even ever really consider them in my estimation. I just would never, ever consider them even close. I feel like they were a bit of a ripoff. But, I mean, to me, it's easy. If you want to say Horseman, I would never argue with you, and it could be many different incarnations of Horseman, but I'm going to go NWO. I think New World Order was the greatest faction of all time, no doubt about it.
Well, and I know a lot of people, it is that nostalgia. The Horsemen were the one that kind of put those groups on the map, that really stood out when you talk about all the great, the families that we had, Jimmy Hart's first family, the Heenan family, a lot of families back then, right? Everybody was, the bad guys were all families, but there were some tremendous groups, but the ones that really stood out at that time, the Horsemen, all the champions, the top of their game, no pun intended here, the workhorses of professional wrestling, and such just a unique bunch brought together that really stood out. But I'm going to agree with you here. It has to be the NWO. We talk about game changers crossing over into the mainstream. And I actually just had this conversation the other day. I can't remember which group it was, but somebody was like very offended that I suggested the NWO. But as we're sitting here, what are we away from the NWO? How many decades out? 2-3 decades since we'd seen that. And they're still leading merch sellers.
Yeah,
they still have an influence over professional wrestling. Hey, I love the Horsemen, but I can't remember the last time I seen anyone wearing a Horseman T-shirt.
You know what? It's insane when you think about it. I always look in the crowd for wrestling shows. I'm just curious if there's still NWO shirts, or when I go to wrestling shows, whether it's an indie, whether it's WWE, or whatever show I go to, I just check. No doubt about it, and it's not 100% tried and true, but it's close. always an NWO shirt. And every damn time I go to a concert, no joke, I always see an NWO shirt. I'm like, this is crazy. Like how ingrained in the culture they are 30 years later. Like everybody is obsessed or at least knows or likes the logo or whatever. I always see NWO shirts, especially at like rock concerts and stuff. I mean, you see a lot of Austin shirts too, obviously, but I mean, you see a lot of NWO stuff. You see random like celebrities wearing NWO stuff. It's strange. It's crazy, but I love it. But they got to be great.
You still regularly, if it be in sports, whatever the case might be, entertainment, even out in public, you get a lot of too sweets. You get a lot of crotch chops. And that came, yes. I know, as you said, DX sampled a lot of those, but those came from the NWO, and hands down, the greatest faction that's existed in the history of professional wrestling. Hey, possibly we're talking some of those families, and you always got to have a fatherly figure, a leader amongst them. This is another great topic of debate amongst wrestling fans, and that is those cornermen, the handlers, the managers. And I know, hey, you've got to sit down and interview some of the absolute best in the business of professional wrestling.
Oh, big time, big time. And I forget who asked me this the other day, and I was just thinking of like 4 guys that would be maybe like on the Mount Rushmore of great managers. We're kind of talking about it. And I just threw out there kind of jokingly, Slick. And they're like, oh, you really like Slick? And I was like, actually, you know what? I go, I probably would put him way up there. It's like, I loved him as a manager. He was funny. He could talk like nobody else. He just, the theme song, his movement, just the way he got involved in matches. Like, I definitely put him up there. But you got to put up there like Captain Lou Albano, definitely. Jimmy Hart is definitely way, way up there. I was never I always liked him as a manager, meaning Paul Heyman and Paulie Dangerously, but I never considered him like Mount Rushmore guy. But the last several years, I definitely have to put him up there because if you think about it, Lesnar, always the main event, and he was managing him. Then he was managing Punk, always the main event. Then he managed Roman Reigns for 4 years, always the main event. Seth Rollins now, he's the main event. So you have to consider Heyman, not only obviously for his great promo ability, but the fact that he's always in and around the main event. So his level of importance always rises too. So you got to put Heyman up there, but the best. I mean, it's one of those things where you can have a million guys come along and, oh, this guy did great, that guy did great. Nobody's going to be better than Bobby the Brain Heenan as far as managers. To me, you just can't. I think he's the best. Cornette, close. Jim Cornette's very close, but I got to go Bobby the Brain Heenan.
I think, when we have that debate between Cornette and Heenan in that position, I think Heenan gets the edge because he did it for the bigger company. He did it on the bigger stage. He had those bigger moments, the bigger clients, the bigger matches that he was involved in. I know you've had this conversation with a lot of people. Heenan as the manager, arguably the greatest rival to one of the greatest of all time in Hulk Hogan.
Yes, yes.
Big time. That makes it pretty difficult to argue against Heenan. And, of course, Cornette with an incredible resume. I would like to add, and this kind of irritates me a lot of times when people are having this conversation, is that no love for Sister Sherry and how good Sherry Martel was in that position as a manager and what she just complete package, what she brought so well-rounded and what she could bring to the business of professional wrestling. So a little shout out there to Sister Sherry. I'm going to talk about her a little bit more in a moment, but I'm going to go with that second name, or who you kind of put over. A lot of people talk about in today's reference. I'm going to go with Paul Heyman. I'm going to give him the nod. I think it's because of the recent work and the longevity, how he's been able to reinvent himself and go to so many different promotions and work with so many incredible talents, especially in this age where the manager is almost it's an extinct piece of the business. It's like the dinosaur. Right. And for the advocate now to reinvent that, reimagine that position and work with all of these top names, I'm going to give that nod to Paulie Dangerously, Paul Heyman as the greatest manager of all time. Plus, I know as an old school fan, both of us, man, we got a little sweet spot in our hearts for another maybe lost art in professional wrestling, because when we got to experience it growing up, man. Some of the absolute best. We're going to talk about it right now. The greatest tag team of all time.
This is a hard one for me because when you actually think about it, do we really want to say this team is better than this team because of, let's say, drawing power or work rate or pop or, whatever. So different. So I'm kind of going in it, maybe a little bit of a different direction per se. Like I always think about Midnight Express because I think they were probably the greatest workers as far as a tag team. Then I was thinking about Tully and Arn, who might be considered the greatest workers for a tag team. WWF tag team champions, NWA tag team champions, just could literally work with anybody, They were awesome. I love the Rock and Roll Express, but I wouldn't put them quite up there as the greatest. But I do think that they like deserve like some sort of consideration because I thought they were unbelievable and maybe the most over babyface team as far as not being monsters, like the under, coming from up from behind, the underdog coming from the bottom to the top kind of thing. But then you got to think about like the Hart Foundation, unbelievable team. The British Bulldogs, another unbelievable team. Another team that I absolutely love and maybe doesn't get enough recognition. Demolition is another awesome,
Yeah,
awesome
I was a
team.
Demolition guy. I know you're going to be mentioning here shortly, but I was always a
Yeah.
Demolition guy first over the big debate there.
But then you want to think of who's the most over tag team of all time. Who is like the best drawing power tag team? And LOD, Legion of Doom, aka the Road Warriors, they would have to be mentioned and obviously considered and highly, highly considered greatest tag team. If somebody said they were the greatest tag team of all time, I would 100% agree with them. They definitely were the most over. They definitely made the most money. But to me, right there with them, neck and neck, and who I'm going to put as my greatest tag team of all time, and because they threw around the Road Warriors like they were babies, the Stein brothers. Love
Oh,
the Stein
whoa, wow. Great
Yes.
pick there. I did not see that
Yes.
one coming.
Yes.
You don't have like some upcoming interviews with Scott and Rick, do you?
No, but I did. I want to interview Rick really bad. Somehow I never had him, but I had Scott on last year. He was awesome. I was actually surprised he was so awesome, funny and sarcastic. And he was great. I thought he might be, Scott Steiner. He might get Big Papa Pump. You know what I mean?
Oh man, you surprised me with that one there, brother. What a great pick.
Little swerve there.
I do want to touch on a lot of people go with the Road Warriors. It is hard to debate that the Road Warrior pop. Those guys were truly larger than life. They were just a completely different beast. So it is hard to argue them. But I want to make a case for a team that you did mention. And again, I feel maybe where they fall short or maybe get forgotten in some fans' eyes is because they didn't get to do it on that biggest stage. They didn't get that WWE run during the, when we really would have loved to have seen that. I knew they took a meeting. It just didn't work. I am going to go with the Midnight Express.
Nice.
As you said, such great workhorses. Athletes, you had the showmanship. I mean, they did sell out arenas. They were headlining a bunch of those tours.
Who do you like better, Lane and Condrey, or Lane and Eden, or Eden and Condrey?
I think I like the first pairing, the original one there. But you couldn't really go wrong. We had the ins and outs of why they had to make the change. But we're talking tag team, and to me, the key word there is team. And what gave them the edge is the greatness of Jim Cornette that could add those missing intangibles that the performers, the talents, well, they're all talents, the wrestlers, what they brought. And for Cornette to just complement that perfectly as a complete package, what an amazing tag team.
What workers. Oh my God. Could work with anybody.
They were so good. It is a shame how great it would have been to see them go in and get even just maybe a couple year run there in the WWF
Right.
at the time.
Yep.
That story of them taking the meeting, sneaking up to Connecticut is hilarious. About Vince wanting to talk about toys, and they're like, "What the hell is this guy talking about?"
Yeah, that's so good. Yep.
Yeah, and then they find out 2 years later when Shiki's talking about making $1 million off of his action figure. They're like, "Holy shit! Maybe we should have taken that meeting a little more seriously."
Yep.
Poz, you did mention Mount Rushmores earlier. And for our final few topics here on this very special episode of Who Is of the 10 Count, I wanted to expand this and not just talk about our great, but show love across the board. So let's start with the women's division, the side of professional wrestling. We're going to do Mount Rushmores here. So who would you put 4 spots here for your women's Mount Rushmore?
This was tough for me just because I could leave out names and people are like, how did you leave out this one or Jude Byer should have been mentioned or whoever, right? So I'm just thinking of almost like one from each era that was like the biggest of that era or maybe the best of that era. Just who sticks out to me? So I'm thinking, obviously, it has to be Fabulous Moolah. Without her, I know she's very selfish and kind of, but without her, is there really women's wrestling? Yeah, to a certain extent, yes, but not on the scale of a WWF or something very globally known. So I'm going to have to go Fabulous Moolah for sure. I loved Medusa. I feel like she was like the most legit, maybe, if you know what I mean, like oh my God, she could kick a guy's ass, like that kind of thing. Like, so I got to go Medusa.
She was driving monster trucks and married to a Cincinnati Bengal. Got to show some love there for Medusa.
Yes. Got to go Trish Stratus, probably my favorite of all time for many different reasons. Won't get into that, but for many different reasons. In ring, looks, promos, all encompassing, charisma, star power. I got to go Trish. And then I don't know, how could you not have Charlotte Flair included, just because I think she's the best from today, like the best women's wrestler in the last 10 years.
Good picks. Good picks. Awesome women's Mount Rushmore. Now, I will say, I was kind of looking at this, trying to get a perspective that kind of you had. You described it perfectly, but I was trying to look at, the historic aspect of women's wrestling. And I got to tell you, as I was looking about maybe who I would want to put on that Mount Rushmore, the reason I didn't go back pre like WrestleMania or anything like that, or even, pre-90s is, did they really evolve and change women's wrestling? Because it's still up to that point. There were some that stood out and some great stories. We just saw, the great movie that was released that told the June story and all that, but it was still a sideshow.
Yes.
It still was just a bonus attraction to try to get some people through the doors. It didn't go to the forefront itself. So I kind of eliminated them. So I'm going to have a lot more modern names on my list. But again, I'm going to go back to a talent that I previously mentioned here on the episode. First on my list is Sensational Sherry Martel. Incredible in-ring talent, incredible promo, incredible manager. To me, she could do it all. In an ever-changing where they weren't expected, there wasn't a lot of opportunities in the ring. She embraced what was given to her, made the absolute best of it. So to me, she should be in a conversation with greatest managers, greatest women wrestlers, maybe just overall talents in a top 10 list of those. That's how impressed I was always just been by her contributions to professional wrestling. So I got Sherry on there. I'm also going to go Trish Stratus, which I think is great because, she was one of those hires, the bikini models. And we remember how bad she was when she came in. She was just supposed to be eye candy. They paired her with TNA. That's what she was supposed to represent.
And somehow became a great worker.
She buckled down. She got focused. She understood the business. She adapted. And now look at it here. I think almost anybody, unless you're absolutely insane, she would be in the conversation for your Mount Rushmore for women's wrestlers. Another I'm going to put on there, and I don't think she gets a lot of love, and I would have liked to have seen her maybe get another run, a Legends run, big pop, bring her back so people can really remember her. But I know inside the business, everybody loves her, and it's Gail Kim. And hey, your great friend Dutch, Dirty Dutch, right? Tell when he was working with the Knockouts division, and she was at the forefront there. To me, in the last or in the modern era, maybe ever in women's wrestling, what Dutch was doing with the Knockouts division then, probably the best for women's wrestling that they've ever seen.
Yeah,
and it was underappreciated maybe because it was just, under the TNA banner.
Yep.
In that last spot, I had a couple names, and I really wanted to throw in there maybe like a Mickie James and all that. So many good names. Maybe a Chyna, a game changer, what she represented and how we looked at how women compete on the level with the men and all that. But I am going to agree with you. I'm going to give my fourth and final spot to the modern day best in the world. She is so good at what she does. Second generation, just a natural, out there doing it to fulfill that dream of her brothers. But I'm going to go with my Shar. Who?
I knew it. You're obsessed.
Who, by the way, I don't know, man. I'm a little upset with her, man. She got me a little mad. She's hanging out with A-Rod at Lakers games. So
Shane McMahon too, though. She was with Shane too.
I ain't worried.
Did you see that?
I ain't worried about Shane O'Mac, man. I'm worried about A-Rod in there, man. First he got what? Torrie Wilson, and now he's going after Charlotte, man. So.
Yeah, he's a wrestling mark. He really is, because you see him gushing over Rick. He was like, really, because he was wooing and everything else. He's like, oh, I love you, Rick. Like, A-Rod really is a mark, I think.
There we go, brother. There we go. Well, of course, if we're talking about the women's Mount Rushmore, our next topic's going to be, we're going to flip it over to the dudes. So how you doing, Poz? Who are your dudes, your men's Mount Rushmore?
This is a tough one because, man, I could mention Brett or Dusty or Funk or Lawler and put them on that list, or Macho Man isn't going to make my list, which is insane because I think he's maybe the best. I got to go with the top four who I think are, when I think of wrestling, and Andre's not even going to be on my list either. So it's like, when I think of wrestling, who is the best? And maybe two from two era, two from another era, so to speak. But just absolutely, who are the four best in my mind ever? And I don't care about longevity or not longevity. This is just, to me, Bruno's not on it either, which is, a lot of people might say. So my four best: Hulk Hogan, without a doubt. If he's not on your Mount Rushmore, I will immediately consider your Mount Rushmore to be null and void, and I will not even speak to you about wrestling anymore, because you're nuts. Because without Hogan, there is no modern. Even Michael Cole said, without Hogan, he goes, we're not here on Netflix. We're not having $1 billion years. Without Hogan, who knows? Without Hogan, Vince McMahon, if you think about it, I know he's a genius and all this other stuff. Without Hogan, right? He'd be selling hot dogs at the New Hampshire hockey arena. Okay, that's where he would be. Okay, that's where Vince would have ended up with some hockey league. Okay, so Hogan.
New Hampshire hot dogs are delicious. Though. Don't sell them short.
Well, if you know the story, when he owned that hockey league, him and Linda used to make hot dogs and sell them at the thing, so they would save money for the hockey arena by making the food and then making double the profit, because they're not making. Long story, but anyway, that's what he would still be doing if it wasn't for Vince. Or if it wasn't for Hulk. So Hulk's got to be on the Mount Rushmore. The Nature Boy Ric Flair, to me, if you're encompassing who is the greatest, and he was a big draw, maybe not compared to Hogan, but he was a big draw everywhere he went. If you want to just say in-ring wise two, arguably the best two, to me, one of the most well-known, even maybe more famous now than ever, with all these rap guys and everybody singing about him and creating stuff.
Where you go, they know Flair.
Everybody knows Flair, and it's funny. He says, oh, he's in WWF long enough. Yeah, he was. Just back off, okay? But it's Hogan is Flair, no doubt. Got to go Stone Cold Steve Austin. Without him, who knows? He set WWF into the next stratosphere. And then I got to go Rock. The Rock, I know neck and neck with Austin, and kind of without Austin, there is no Rock. But I think Rock took it here and took it to the next stratosphere, because he came back and had two more runs, basically, essentially, way after the fact, way after his quote-unquote prime, and did enormous business for the WWF. So Hogan, Flair, Austin, Rock.
I'm going to agree with a lot of the names that you said. I might reorganize them here a little bit. But for my parameters, when I'm looking at a Mount Rushmore for me, and as you said, man, it's all about how you look at it. You could go with, like, the Bretts, the Undertakers.
Yeah.
Maybe even, who he told us he was one of the greatest, all WrestleMania season Triple H. That might be the case. But for me, big time, when wrestling fans talk about the greatest sellers, you think of, again, a Shawn Michaels, who might be on some of those Mount Rushmores. That's selling to them. To me, selling is selling tickets, selling pay-per-views, selling merchandise, putting asses in the seats, selling the business. So those are the greatest. That's the point of professional wrestling, that it gets overlooked. So I'm going to agree with a few of your names. My first one, and I think it comes down to one, I love that he was able to do it a little bit as a counter to what I was saying earlier. Flair at the top of the wrestling world without, in many cases, where he made his name without the machine, where Hogan had that. Flair was still hot around the country. People around the world, people knew who he was. And again, I give him that number one spot because of the longevity. He is still hot, man. People still love him.
Yep.
Probably in the top percentile of recognized wrestling names today. Going today.
100%. Yep, 100%.
So I give it to Flair. There is no denying Hulk Hogan. You laid it out there perfect. We're not sitting here having these conversations, doing what we do, loving wrestling the way we do without Hulk Hogan. That's undeniable. You throw your personal feelings aside about the man behind the character, behind the wrestler, whatever. That's fine, but you can't deny the greatness and what the contributions. Stone Cold Steve Austin. Or, you can make a case that, move him up to that one or that two spot. What he did, changing the business, again, pushing it to the forefront of society, breaking all those barriers against someone that still remains so popular. Look at the top merchandise sellers up there with the NWOs, the 316 shirts. You put The Rock in. To me, Rock was a feeder off of the success of Stone Cold, but so crucial to have that number two, especially to step in when Austin was injured, or stepping away from the ring. That's great, but not on mine. I'm going with the modern day GOAT, who we've seen record financials, who carried the company when they're more worried about the G rating and advertisers and all that. I'm going with John Cena for my fourth spot.
Whoa. What financial records did he ever break?
John Cena, the company goes to all new heights. He's the leader there when they go public. You look setting the stage for all these record distribution deals, globalization that they spread out. He led the way on all that, man, and the great sacrifices that he took to be the face that ran that place. John
I
Cena,
feel like,
baby, a leader of generation since the mid 2000s to
oof,
now with his farewell tour.
oof. I don't know. I feel like the Cena effect, if you will, which means business not as good as it should have been or could have been, but he's selling merch, so it's like, oh, well, I guess that could be the case, and we can do this, do that. They lost more fans than they gained with Cena. So even Cody brought it up. You kind of left this place worse than you were kind of pretending. You ain't the GOAT. Like, I don't know. To me, Cena, no way. I just think he's maybe the most overrated because yes, they're doing these business deals. Yes, they're going, gee, but how many millions of fans? More, they've lost more fans with him on top than anybody else.
Did they? Did they?
Yeah.
They might have
Oh,
lost
yeah.
those. They might have had a falling off domestically, but globally they have grown incredibly.
And this year, you can't give him any credit for this thing. It was all built with Roman and Cody, and he just like, oh, I'm going to do this retirement thing so I can slide in and get into this hot business.
You're crazy. You are
But,
crazy.
that, by the way, I had nothing to do with that. Roman Reigns is the first $1 billion champion in history, and then all of a sudden Cody was making even more money. Let me slide into this. Had nothing to do with him, and the whole fact that everyone was disappointed with WrestleMania because The Rock didn't show up kind of shows you where Cena is on the pecking order.
All right. Mr. Complaining about people piggybacking, Mr. Hulk Hogan fan. I'm not even going to hear that argument from you, brother. All right, hey, you know what? Hey, that might be our next 10 count special. We might just have the John Cena, the great debate. We'll come up with 10 different.
We could. Yeah.
If you guys can come up with shoot them the Poz and me 10 different topics about John Cena that we can debate, we'll absolutely do that for
I'll
you guys.
shred them all down. I'll shred it down. I'll shred them apart.
Yeah, you won't be hulking up on that one, buddy. Because you ain't gonna be able to see me because I'm gonna be blowing right by you on that one, brother.
I can't believe you're a Cena mark. Jeez. Oh my God.
All right, that brings us to this episode's Pop of the Week, our Pro Wrestling Pop of the Week. So I got something a little special. We're talking who is. So, Poz, I got a big question for you. Who is your 5 wrestlers of all time? I need you to give me 5 here to take on one gorilla.
Whoa. Haku. Barbarian.
Oh, yeah. Ooh,
Barbarian.
Okay. All right.
Definitely. Rick Steiner, Scott Steiner, and I'll throw in their modern day tough guy, the modern day Haku, Jacob Fatu.
Oh, I like it. I love it, brother. I just want to get yours, man. I'm not going to argue. I'm not going to debate that. So, again, you have got Haku, Barbarian, Scott Steiner, and who's got Jacob Fatu? Or both Steiner.
And Rick Steiner. Yep. And Jacob. Yep.
All right. And, hey, let us know in the comments. You got 5 pro wrestlers all time to take on one gorilla. Who you got there, man? I knew you were going to go Haku. I got that, man. Poz, thank you, man. This was a lot of fun. We run and a lot of long. Hey, if you got an idea out there for a special episode here for us on the 10 count, let us know. This one was a lot of fun. We're going to get to work on maybe our John Cena special. We'll be back with the regular news, notes, headlines on a new episode next week of the 10 count. But as right now, thanks everybody for joining us. Help us spread the word. Get that link. Go to your socials. Let everybody know about this great new show, the 10 Count. For Poz, I'm RBV. We love you.